Babe Ruth. The name is synonymous with baseball. From a troubled childhood in Baltimore to redefining the game itself, Ruth's journey was anything but ordinary. In a sport where strategy once ruled, he introduced power, excitement, and a new way to play. This is the story of how one man changed baseball forever and became an icon. This is Babe Ruth, the rise of a legend. Babe Ruth was born on February 6, 1895, in the city of Baltimore, Maryland. His birth name was George Herman Ruth Jr., the first child of George Sr. and Kate Schamberger Ruth. His family lived above a saloon his father operated in a rough part of town, where street fights, poverty, and instability were common. From a very young age, Ruth was exposed to a world that was loud, chaotic, and often unforgiving. His parents, both German-American, struggled to make ends meet and had little time or energy for discipline. Ruth's early years weren't filled with bedtime stories or toys. They were filled with the noise of bar brawls and the silence of emotional distance. As he grew, Ruth began to show the effects of that environment. He wandered the streets, skipped school, and got into frequent trouble. Neighbors and relatives would later recall how young George was known more for his mischief than anything else. He wasn't just a restless boy. He was wild, undisciplined, and often left to his own devices. Without structure or proper guidance, he became a street kid, one who was more comfortable in alleyways than classrooms. The city of Baltimore had plenty of kids like George, but something about him was different. There was energy in him that hadn't yet found its direction. The Ruth household expanded rapidly over the next few years, but not every child survived infancy. Out of the 8 children born to his parents, only George and one sister, Mamie, lived to adulthood. This constant loss took a heavy emotional toll on the family, especially on George's mother. The home grew even colder, more strained, and filled with grief. As the eldest child, George should have been a stabilizing presence, but instead, he slipped further into rebellion. His father, often consumed with the bar business and known to drink himself, failed to provide structure. George's mother, already weakened by health issues, lacked the strength to control him. By age 7, George had become too much for his parents to handle. His antics at home and school left them no choice but to seek outside help. In 1902, they sent him to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, a reform institution run by Catholic priests. Though this decision would change the course of his life forever, it was not made out of hope. It was made out of desperation. The boy who would one day draw thousands to stadiums was first sent away because he couldn't be trusted at home. And as the gates of St. Mary's closed behind him, George Ruth left childhood as he knew it. In many ways, that act of abandonment defined Ruth's early understanding of the world. He was not a boy sent off to thrive. He was a boy pushed away. That wound never fully healed, and for the rest of his life, he would carry the fear of being forgotten or unloved. Yet within the strict walls of the reformatory, something unexpected began to take root. A new version of George Ruth would slowly begin to emerge. One shaped not by punishment, but by opportunity. The years that followed Ruth's arrival at St. Mary's were not easy. The institution was a mixture of order and hardship. The boys there were often orphans or delinquents, and the daily routine was strict and repetitive. For a boy used to roaming the streets, the rules of the school felt like prison. Yet, over time, Ruth began to settle into the rhythm. The structure, though rigid, provided something he never had at home: predictability. But life outside the school continued to unravel. His mother, Kate, had been sick for some time, and while Ruth was away, her condition worsened. In 1912, when George was just 17, she passed away. Though the two were not especially close, her death struck a chord. Ruth had already been sent away. Now, the chance for any kind of reconciliation was gone. The grief didn't show on his face, but it simmered inside him. His family continued to fall apart without her. His father remarried quickly and distanced himself from George even more. 1 year later, tragedy struck again. George Sr. was involved in a violent bar fight, one that turned deadly. During the brawl, he fell and suffered a fatal injury, dying shortly after. George Jr. was just 18 years old when both his parents were gone. In many ways, he was now truly alone. No home to return to, no father to guide him, no mother to comfort him. For a boy who already felt abandoned, this was confirmation. The world gives you nothing unless you take it. Yet Ruth didn't break under the weight of his past. Instead, he leaned into the few things that made sense to him: routine, movement, and baseball. The pain of his childhood didn't disappear. It turned into drive. It's often said that Ruth played the game like he had something to prove. And maybe that's because he did. Every swing, every run, every record, it all came from a place deeper than ambition. It came from hunger, a hunger to be seen, to be remembered, to matter. St. Mary's became more than a boarding school. It became a cocoon. It shielded Ruth from the chaos of the outside world and gave him a chance to rebuild from within. While many boys there faded into obscurity, Ruth found a way to rise. It wasn't because he was the smartest or the most obedient. It was because he had fire, and fire, when channeled, can light a path or burn everything in its way. Those early years didn't just shape Ruth, they carved him. From the loss of his mother to the violent death of his father, from the shame of being sent away to the grind of institutional life, everything left a mark. And yet, somewhere within all that loss, a legend was quietly forming. Located on the outskirts of Baltimore, St. Mary's was built not to nurture, but to correct. The school functioned as both orphanage and reform institution, housing over 800 boys at any given time. It was run by the Xaverian Brothers, a Catholic religious order known for discipline, routine, and faith-based education. Boys woke at dawn, prayed before meals, worked with their hands, and studied the Bible daily. To the outside world, it was a place of redemption. To the boys inside, it was something between a military camp and a monastery. At first, Ruth struggled. He had a hard time following instructions, often got into fights, and rebelled against authority. But unlike the chaotic home he'd come from, St. Mary's didn't ignore him. The brothers didn't look away or give up on him. Instead, they pushed him hard. They gave him chores, punished him for disrespect, and made sure he understood consequences. That pressure, strange as it was, started shaping him. Slowly, Ruth began to adapt. What surprised the brothers most wasn't Ruth's strength. It was his energy. He couldn't sit still. He ran, hit, shouted, climbed. He was a force, hard to tame, but impossible to ignore. And within this endless motion, something important emerged. George Ruth wasn't just physically strong, he was gifted. On the school's small dirt field with makeshift bats and worn gloves, Ruth began to show signs of rare talent. By age 12, it was clear he had something special. He could throw harder, run faster, and hit farther than most boys his age. He wasn't polished, but he was powerful. When the brothers began organizing more structured baseball games among the students, Ruth dominated. He pitched with precision and strength, and when he stepped up to the plate, the ball didn't just travel, it soared. Word of his ability spread quickly through the school. Though the school's primary goal was religious and moral education, they began to make exceptions for Ruth. He was allowed extra time on the baseball field. He practiced with older students. The brothers even organized games against local amateur teams so he could face tougher competition. And each time, Ruth delivered. His confidence grew, and so did his discipline. St. Mary's was still strict, but Ruth had found an outlet, and it changed everything. The institution may have been built to fix broken boys, but for George Ruth, it did something more powerful. It gave him purpose. He stopped being just another troublemaker and started becoming someone to watch. a name whispered on the benches, a kid whose throws made people turn their heads. Baseball became his language, his freedom, and the beginning of a destiny no one could have predicted. At the center of Ruth's transformation stood brother Matias Batlier, a tall, imposing figure with a booming voice and a deep love for the game of baseball. Unlike many of the other brothers, Matias wasn't just a disciplinarian. He was a coach, a teacher, and eventually a father figure. He recognized early on that Ruth needed more than rules. He needed structure with purpose. And baseball, for Matias, was more than a game. It was a classroom. Matias taught Ruth how to pitch properly, how to read batters, and how to handle a bat with power and patience. But more importantly, he taught him self-control. Not by force, but by example. When Ruth lost his temper, Matias corrected him. When he slacked off, Matias reminded him that talent alone wouldn't carry him. The discipline of the game mirrored the discipline of life, and Ruth listened. In many interviews later in life, Ruth would always mention brother Matias. He never forgot the man who first believed in him. Even when Ruth became one of the biggest stars in America, he credited his success not to luck or natural ability, but to the man who gave him direction when he had none. The bond between them was never sentimental. It was built on mutual respect. Matias saw something in Ruth, and Ruth, for once, wanted to make someone proud. They spent hours on the field together. Matias would hit balls to Ruth until the sun went down. He corrected his stance, refined his swing, and taught him to pitch with control. Ruth soaked it all in. For a boy with so much raw energy, this training became his lifeline. He had finally found someone who could match his intensity and direct it towards something meaningful. As Ruth improved, Matias began inviting local scouts and amateur coaches to watch him play. He knew Ruth had potential beyond the school walls. Eventually, those visits would lead to professional interest. But in those early days, it wasn't about fame. It was about one man helping a troubled boy find his way. And that quiet act of mentorship would shape the future of baseball forever. Brother Matias didn't just help create a player, he helped mold a man. And for Ruth, that made all the difference. By the time George Ruth reached his teenage years, it was clear that baseball wasn't just a pastime. It was his destiny. His natural athleticism, combined with the discipline instilled in him by brother Matias, transformed him from a rough, around-the-edges troublemaker into a polished athlete. Though Ruth had always shown promise as a pitcher, his power at the plate started to shine through. It became apparent that baseball wasn't just something he was good at. It was something he was born to do. At St. Mary's, Ruth wasn't just any player. He was a force on the field. His throws were sharp, his swings were powerful, and when he hit the ball, it didn't just go, it soared. Ruth was playing against boys his age, but his abilities often outclassed them. His reputation spread through the school like wildfire, and soon, even the older boys had to take notice. Ruth wasn't just another kid. They had to treat him as a peer, one who could go toe-to-toe with anyone. But it wasn't only his skills that stood out, it was his relentless drive. The boy who had been abandoned by his parents had now found something to fight for. Baseball, his one shot at greatness. By the time Ruth was 15, he was already being compared to professional athletes. His fastball had the kind of velocity scouts dreamt about, and his bat was already sending balls flying out of the park. The transition from St. Mary's to the professional world seemed inevitable. Scouts began to notice him, offering him opportunities to play in the minor leagues. His talent was undeniable, and his future was no longer just a dream. It was a plan in motion. But Ruth's time at St. Mary's wasn't just about perfecting his baseball skills. It was about learning how to channel his energy into something productive. It was about growth, about becoming a person who could move past his troubled childhood and take on a new identity as a man and as a player. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, though. Despite his talent, Ruth still had much to learn. His temper, his impulsiveness, and his tendency to rebel were all things he'd have to overcome if he wanted to succeed in the real world. The world outside St. Mary's was no longer going to protect him. He would be tested in ways he had never imagined. But for now, all he had to do was focus on the game. Baseball was his escape and his way forward, a path that would soon take him from the streets of Baltimore to the ballparks of America. St. Mary's had given Ruth something that no other institution could: hope. Hope for a future that seemed far out of reach just a few short years ago. The troubled boy from the streets of Baltimore had been reborn, and the future, with all its glory and challenge, was now in his hands. In many ways, Ruth's time at St. Mary's marked the beginning of the journey that would lead him to become the most famous baseball player in the world. It wasn't just the training that mattered. It was the lessons he learned about who he could be. And when the world would later call him the Sultan of Swat or the Bambino, they would be calling not just a great player, but a man who had turned his life around. All it took was a little discipline, a little guidance, and a whole lot of heart. Ruth's rise was just beginning, and it would change the world of sports forever. In 1914, at just 19 years old, George Herman Ruth's life was about to change forever. After years of hard work and guidance from brother Matias at St. Mary's, Ruth's natural talent for baseball caught the attention of a scout from the Baltimore Orioles. The Orioles were part of the minor leagues, but they were an important stepping stone for any aspiring major league player. Ruth had been spotted as a future star, and the opportunity to play professionally was something he could not pass up. It was a world away from the rigid structure of St. Mary's, but Ruth was ready. He packed his bags and headed to Baltimore. The Orioles quickly noticed Ruth's powerful arm, which had been honed on the playing fields of St. Mary's. He was signed on to the team in 1914, starting his career in the minor leagues. The transition was stark. In the minor leagues, Ruth was no longer just a talented boy. He was now a professional athlete, expected to perform at a higher level. His pitching ability stood out right away, and it wasn't long before Ruth became a key player for the Orioles. He showed his natural talent with a fastball that could move like few others in the league. His arm strength, honed through years of hard work, was already drawing comparisons to major league pitchers. However, Ruth's time with the Orioles was short-lived. Despite his talent, his rawness as a player showed in his inconsistency and lack of formal training. The Orioles recognized his potential, but knew that if Ruth was going to make it to the big leagues, he needed to be polished. They offered him the opportunity to train harder, focusing not just on his pitching, but on his overall game. Ruth worked harder than ever, and before long, he would catch the eye of one of the biggest teams in baseball, the Boston Red Sox. The time Ruth spent with the Orioles wasn't just about baseball. It was about proving to himself that he belonged in the game. His success there wasn't about fame. It was about earning respect. The Orioles gave him the tools to make the leap to Major League Baseball, and Ruth took those tools and applied them in ways few could predict. Baltimore was just the beginning, and Ruth knew he had much farther to go. When he was signed to the Red Sox, it wasn't just a dream come true. It was his ticket to a higher level of competition. But even as he entered the major leagues, Ruth's story was only beginning. He wasn't a finished product yet, and the world had yet to see the power that was about to be unleashed. In the spring of 1914, Ruth made the leap from the minor leagues to the Boston Red Sox, one of the most storied franchises in Major League Baseball. This move marked the beginning of a new chapter in his career. It was also a huge transition for Ruth, who had never played in front of the large crowds and under the intense scrutiny of the Major League spotlight. At first, Ruth was a pitcher for the Red Sox, and it was there that he quickly earned a reputation as one of the best young pitchers in the league. Ruth's pitching success was immediate. His fastball was powerful, and his ability to strike batters out left an impression on both coaches and players. In 1916, Ruth led the league with 23 wins, and his dominance on the mound helped the Red Sox win the World Series that year. Ruth wasn't just good, he was a force on the field, and the Red Sox soon recognized his potential. His pitching was a cornerstone of the team's success, and Ruth was quickly becoming a household name. But Ruth was not satisfied with just being a pitcher. He wanted to be more than just a star on the mound. Baseball wasn't just a job for Ruth. It was his passion, his escape, and his chance to make something of himself. As he continued to play for the Red Sox, Ruth started to express his desire to play every day, not just pitch on occasion. He wanted to be an everyday player, a batter, a fielder, and a force to be reckoned with. Despite his success as a pitcher, Ruth wasn't content. He wasn't just a pitcher. He was an athlete, and he had the heart of a slugger. The Red Sox took notice of his desire, but they didn't immediately give him a chance to play every day. Ruth's dream of stepping up to the plate on a regular basis would take time, but it was becoming clear that his talents went far beyond pitching. By 1917, Ruth's desire to play every day had reached its peak. He had earned the respect of his teammates, but he wasn't content with just being a part of the team. He wanted to be at the center of it all. The move to the Red Sox was the catalyst for Ruth's transformation. He had gone from a talented pitcher to a player who was ready to take over the game. His time in Boston would be short-lived, but it would set the stage for something bigger. Ruth's transition from pitcher to hitter wasn't something that happened overnight, but it didn't take long for him to prove his power at the plate. He wasn't just another pitcher who could occasionally hit home runs. He was a slugger, one of the few pitchers in the dead ball era who had the power to hit the long ball. It wasn't normal for a pitcher to be both a dominant force on the mound and a legitimate power hitter. But Ruth had a rare gift. His swing was effortless, yet powerful, and it made the ball soar into the stands like few could match. In 1919, Ruth hit 29 home runs, breaking the record for the most home runs in a single season. That achievement didn't just make headlines. It changed the way people thought about baseball. Home runs were no longer seen as a rarity. They were becoming a major part of the game. Ruth's power at the plate was so strong that it shifted the dynamics of the sport itself. His ability to hit home runs was one of the key reasons why the live ball era, where offense took center stage, was beginning to take over from the old dead ball style. At the time, Ruth's hitting was seen as a curiosity, a pitcher who could hit home runs. But as his career progressed, it became clear that his hitting wasn't just a sideshow, it was a revolution. Ruth's ability to launch home runs made the game more exciting, drawing fans to stadiums in record numbers. His towering shots weren't just the talk of Boston, they were the talk of the nation. And with every home run, Ruth became a household name. It was this combination of pitching success and hitting power that made Ruth so unique. He wasn't just one of the best pitchers in baseball history. He was quickly becoming one of the most dangerous hitters in the league. His story was no longer just about being a great pitcher. It was about being an all-around player who could change the game with his bat. And this was only the beginning of what would become one of the greatest baseball careers in history. Ruth's transformation into a power hitter marked a turning point, not just for him, but for the entire sport. He would soon go on to become known as the Sultan of Swat, a name that reflected not just his batting power, but his personality as well. Baseball would never be the same again. Ruth's ability to succeed both on the mound and at the plate made him a rare and valuable asset. In fact, it was his combination of skills, his arm, and his bat that set him apart from nearly everyone else in the league. As a pitcher, Ruth won 23 games in 1916, and in 1918, he helped the Red Sox win another World Series. Yet, as strong as he was on the mound, his power at the plate began to overshadow his pitching. When Ruth took the mound, he was a force to be reckoned with, capable of shutting down opposing hitters. But when he stepped up to the plate, he was something else entirely. He wasn't just a pitcher trying to hit, he was a hitter who had been trained to pitch. His swing was powerful and natural, and it was only a matter of time before the Red Sox realized his full potential. His batting statistics were staggering. His ability to hit home runs, drive in runs, and dominate pitchers with his bat was unlike anything they had ever seen from a pitcher. In 1919, Ruth broke the single-season home run record with 29 home runs, a feat that left the baseball world in awe. But his success wasn't limited to that one year. Over the course of his career, Ruth would hit more than 700 home runs, unprecedented at the time. His prowess as a pitcher was slowly overshadowed by his power as a hitter. He wasn't just a great pitcher, he was a great hitter, and the baseball world had never seen anyone like him before. Ruth's combination of pitching and hitting was something that hadn't been seen before. He wasn't just a pitcher with a bat, he was a pitcher who could hit home runs, setting the stage for a new era of baseball. His talent was rare, and it was becoming clear that his future was in the batter's box, not the pitcher's mound. The man who had started as a left-handed pitcher would soon become known as one of the greatest hitters in history. By 1919, Ruth's desire to play every day had reached its peak. He had proven himself as both a pitcher and a hitter, but his ambition to become an everyday player was undeniable. Ruth was tired of being just a part-time pitcher. He wanted to be in the lineup every day, and the only way to do that was to transition from pitcher to full-time outfielder. This decision was monumental. It marked the point where Ruth would no longer be defined by his pitching arm, but by his bat, a decision that would change the face of baseball forever. At first, the Red Sox were reluctant to let go of their star pitcher. Ruth's pitching had been vital to the team's success, but they could see the promise in his bat. Ruth wasn't just a good hitter, he was a dominant hitter. After the 1919 season, the Red Sox made the difficult decision to transition Ruth from a pitcher to an everyday player. It was a decision that would change the course of baseball and make Ruth a household name. His days as a pitcher were over. Now, it was time for Ruth to embrace his new role as a full-time hitter. The transition wasn't easy. Ruth still had a lot to learn as an outfielder, but his power at the plate was undeniable. In 1920, he hit a staggering 54 home runs, smashing his own record and securing his place in history. From that point on, Ruth's legacy was no longer tied to his pitching success. He had entered a new phase of his career, a phase where he would become the greatest power hitter the sport had ever seen. In December 1919, a decision was made that would change the course of baseball history forever. Babe Ruth, who had already made a name for himself as one of the best pitchers and most powerful hitters in baseball, was sold by the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees. At the time, the trade seemed strange to many. The Red Sox, who had just won the World Series, had one of the game's greatest talents on their roster. Yet, for a small sum of $125,000, an unheard of amount at the time, Ruth was sent to the Yankees. This trade, often referred to as the curse of the Bambino, was surrounded by scandal. Many believed that the Red Sox owner, Harry Frazee, sold Ruth to finance a Broadway musical. The decision sent shockwaves through the baseball community. Ruth had helped lead the Red Sox to 3 World Series victories, and now the Red Sox were left without their biggest star. The Yankees, who had always been overshadowed by Boston's dominance, suddenly had a player who would redefine their franchise and the sport. For Ruth, the trade was a fresh start. He was no longer just a pitcher who could hit. He was a full-time hitter, ready to leave his mark on baseball. In New York, Ruth's personality and charm would make him a fan favorite, and his powerful bat would begin to shape the future of the Yankees. But for the Red Sox, the decision was costly. They would go without a championship for 86 years, with fans attributing their long drought to the curse caused by selling Ruth to their rivals. Though Ruth was heartbroken by his departure from Boston, his arrival in New York marked the beginning of an era of unprecedented success. He quickly established himself as the leader of the Yankees, and his larger-than-life persona fit perfectly with the city's energetic and ambitious nature. The Yankees were no longer just another team. They were on the verge of greatness. The trade also marked the end of the old era of baseball, where strategy and small ball dominated. Ruth was a new kind of player, one who could change the game with one swing of the bat. The stage was set for Ruth to lead the Yankees to glory, and for the sport itself to evolve into the thrilling, high-scoring game we know today. Ruth's first season with the Yankees in 1920 was nothing short of revolutionary. It was clear that he was not just a good hitter, he was an extraordinary one. That year, he smashed 54 home runs, breaking the existing record for the most home runs in a season. But Ruth wasn't content with just breaking records. He had changed the game itself. Baseball had previously been dominated by the dead ball era, where games were low scoring and strategy was more important than power. Ruth's home runs marked the beginning of what would become the live ball era, where offense, and particularly the home run, took center stage. The home run, once a rare occurrence, became a staple of baseball because of Ruth. Fans flocked to the ballpark, eager to see the Sultan of Swat hit towering shots into the stands. Ruth's home run ability wasn't just about his physical strength, it was about the style and flair he brought to the game. He didn't just hit home runs, he hit them with power and precision, captivating crowds wherever he went. The game's complexion was changing, and Ruth was at the center of it. In 1919, before Ruth's full-time transition to the Yankees, he had already set the tone by hitting 29 home runs in a single season, a new MLB record. That season was a sign of things to come, but it was in New York that Ruth truly unleashed his full potential. By 1921, he had smashed 59 home runs, a record that would stand for over 30 years. Ruth's influence was so profound that even the other teams began to adjust their strategies to deal with his power. Ruth didn't just set home run records, he elevated the entire sport. His ability to hit long balls made him a national icon, and the way he approached the game, bold, brash, and confident, resonated with fans across the country. He became a symbol of the American spirit, powerful, daring, and larger than life. His success helped fuel baseball's rise in popularity during the 1920s, as fans grew to appreciate the excitement and unpredictability that came with every one of his at-bats. The home run was no longer just an occasional bonus. It was the focal point of the game. Baseball stadiums became arenas of anticipation, with fans eagerly awaiting Ruth's next home run. He didn't just hit for power, he hit to thrill. The era of the home run king had arrived, and it would change baseball forever. When Babe Ruth joined the Yankees, the team was already one of the oldest and most respected in baseball. However, they had never been the dominant force they were about to become. The Yankees had good players, but they lacked the superstar that could carry the team to greatness. Ruth changed all of that. He became the face of the franchise, and more importantly, he became the face of baseball itself. His presence on the field and his ability to hit home runs gave the Yankees the edge they had been missing. Ruth's influence extended far beyond just his performance. He was a showman. His personality, often flamboyant and full of swagger, fit the spirit of New York City perfectly. Fans adored him. They saw him not just as a player, but as a larger-than-life character, a hero whose energy and enthusiasm brought the game to life. He became the Yankees' new icon, a symbol of everything the team aspired to be: dominant, fearless, and unbeatable. Ruth's first years with the Yankees were marked by both personal and team success. He led the Yankees to their first American League pennant in 1921, and his home runs continued to be a major attraction for fans. The Yankees' success on the field mirrored Ruth's own rising popularity, as the team built a championship-caliber lineup around him. But it wasn't just Ruth's bat that had an impact. It was his leadership, his confidence, and his ability to inspire his teammates. As Ruth's fame grew, so did the Yankees' reputation. They weren't just a team, they were a dynasty in the making. Ruth had set the stage for the Yankees' incredible run of success, which would lead to the team's first World Series title in 1923. Ruth's influence on the Yankees was undeniable. He wasn't just a player, he was the heart and soul of the team. And with Ruth at the helm, the Yankees were destined for greatness. By the mid-1920s, the Yankees had become the team to beat in baseball. Ruth's larger-than-life persona and his unmatched talent on the field had made the Yankees the most successful and exciting team in the sport. The era of Ruth and the Yankees was just beginning, and it would go on to define baseball for generations to come. In 1927, Ruth was part of one of the most feared lineups in baseball history, the Yankees' Murderers Row. This lineup, consisting of Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and several other power hitters, was a formidable force. Ruth was the leader of this group, and together they dominated the American League. The Yankees hit a total of 158 home runs that year, with Ruth hitting 60 of them, setting a new record for the most home runs in a single season. The power of Murderers Row was unmatched. Every time Ruth, Gehrig, or any of the other big hitters stepped up to the plate, the crowd knew something special could happen. The team's offensive firepower made them nearly impossible to beat. Ruth's 60 home runs that season were a symbol of his power and influence, and they helped cement his legacy as one of the greatest hitters in baseball history. But Murderers Row wasn't just about the home runs, it was about the team's ability to dominate. The Yankees finished the 1927 season with a 110-44 record, the best in the league. Their success was due in large part to Ruth's leadership and his ability to inspire the players around him. Ruth wasn't just a power hitter, he was a motivator. His passion for the game, his confidence, and his energy were contagious, and they fueled the Yankees' drive toward victory. By the time the Yankees won the World Series in 1927, Ruth had proven himself as one of the most iconic players in baseball. He wasn't just a part of a great team, he was the heart of that team. His 60 home runs were a testament to his power, but his leadership and influence were what made the Yankees the team to beat. The Murderers Row lineup was one of the most dominant forces in sports history, and Ruth was at the center of it all. Babe Ruth's influence on baseball went beyond the records and the home runs. He was the first true sports celebrity in America. His larger-than-life persona and his incredible ability to hit home runs helped fuel baseball's rise in popularity during the 1920s. As Ruth's fame spread, so did the sport's appeal. Fans flocked to ballparks across the country to see the Sultan of Swat in action. His home runs were no longer just highlights. They were the main event. Ruth's success brought fans back to baseball in droves. The sport was no longer just a pastime, it was a spectacle. Ruth's presence in the game helped fuel the growing entertainment culture in America as baseball became a key part of the nation's identity. In a time of economic uncertainty, baseball gave people something to cheer for. Ruth's performances were a source of joy and hope for millions of Americans. By the late 1920s, baseball had fully entered the live ball era, and much of that was thanks to Ruth. His ability to hit home runs transformed the game from a low-scoring contest into a high-scoring, power-driven spectacle. Fans craved offense, and Ruth delivered. His home runs became the driving force behind the game's popularity, and his persona added a level of excitement that hadn't been seen before. Ruth wasn't just a baseball player, he was an entertainer, and baseball was his stage. Ruth's impact extended far beyond the field. He made baseball exciting and accessible to everyone. He wasn't just a player for fans of the sport. He was a figure that transcended baseball and became a cultural icon. Through Ruth, baseball was no longer just a game. It was entertainment, drama, and spectacle all wrapped into one. And as Ruth continued to hit home runs and break records, his influence would change the course of the sport forever. By the late 1920s, Babe Ruth was not just a baseball player. He was a national icon. His larger-than-life personality, combined with his unparalleled ability on the field, made him a fixture in American pop culture. But with fame came intense scrutiny. The public didn't just want to know about Ruth's home runs. They wanted to know about his every move. Newspapers followed his every step, often focusing more on his wild lifestyle than his achievements on the field. Ruth was known for his extravagant behavior. He partied hard, drank excessively, and was often seen in the company of women, leading to a reputation as a womanizer. His behavior was shocking to some and even scandalous to others, but Ruth didn't care. He was living life on his terms, enjoying his fame and fortune. But while this carefree attitude worked in the short term, it would come to haunt him later in life. The intense media attention started to overshadow Ruth's career. Instead of being celebrated purely for his incredible talent, the focus often shifted to his off-field antics. The press painted Ruth as a party-loving playboy, and though Ruth never shied away from his image, it became clear that this lifestyle was beginning to take its toll. It wasn't just the public's perception that was being affected, it was Ruth's own mental state. Despite his charm and popularity, Ruth's personal struggles were rarely out of the spotlight. Every personal failure, every night spent partying, and every scandal became public fodder. The more attention he received, the more it seemed like the pressure was building. The pressure of constantly being under a microscope began to affect his performance on the field. Ruth was no longer just playing baseball. He was performing for an audience that wanted to see him fail as much as they wanted to see him succeed. For Ruth, the fame was a double-edged sword. His career had made him a hero, but his personal life had made him a target. And as the years went on, Ruth found it increasingly difficult to balance both. The public loved to love him, but they also loved to see him stumble. In many ways, Ruth's fame became a prison that he couldn't escape. Every mistake, every indiscretion was magnified under the intense scrutiny of the media. His fall from grace had already begun. Despite everything, Ruth remained a hero to many. He had achieved greatness, but the pressures of fame weighed on him heavily. He had given so much of himself to the game and to the public, but as his struggles with fame continued, he found himself more and more isolated, unsure of who he could trust. As the 1930s progressed, it became increasingly apparent that Ruth's health was deteriorating. The weight that he had gained over the years, combined with a history of partying and poor eating habits, started to take its toll on his body. Ruth was no longer the lean, athletic powerhouse that he had once been. His body, once a machine that could hit towering home runs and strike fear into opposing pitchers, was beginning to slow down. The injuries also began to pile up. Ruth had spent years playing a physically demanding game, and his body was starting to break down. His once explosive swing had become more labored, and his legs, vital for running the bases, became slower and less responsive. The wear and tear on his body, combined with his poor lifestyle choices, meant that Ruth's performance on the field was beginning to suffer. Ruth's weight gain, in particular, was becoming a serious concern. The man who had once been an athletic powerhouse was now often seen as a shadow of his former self. His struggles with weight would become one of the most talked about aspects of his later career. Though he was still capable of hitting home runs, his body was no longer able to keep up with the demands of the game. Ruth's body no longer reflected the strength and energy that had made him an icon. Despite the decline in his physical abilities, Ruth's spirit remained unbroken. He would often push through injuries, determined to stay in the lineup and contribute to his team. But the truth was undeniable. His body was giving out. Ruth was no longer the player who had dominated the sport in the early 1920s. His aging body couldn't sustain the level of performance that had once made him a household name. And though he still had moments of brilliance, they were becoming fewer and farther between. Ruth's health continued to worsen. Throughout the early 1930s, he began to miss games more frequently due to various ailments, and his once unquestionable dominance on the field started to fade. Fans who had once seen him as invincible now watched as the Babe became more human, more vulnerable. Ruth's decline wasn't just physical, it was also emotional. The man who had once been a giant on the baseball field now felt the weight of his own mortality. It wasn't easy for Ruth to accept that his body was betraying him. He had been the strongest, the fastest, the most powerful player in the game, but now he was forced to confront his limitations. His body, once capable of incredible feats, was slowly losing its power. This shift from being a dominant force to someone who had to fight through physical pain marked a sad chapter in Ruth's career. Babe Ruth's life outside of baseball was just as complicated as his performance on the field. His personal struggles were often overshadowed by his on-field achievements, but they were a crucial part of his story. Ruth's marriages in particular were marked by difficulty and disappointment. His first marriage, to Helen Woodford, ended in divorce in 1929 after years of tension. The couple had no children together, and Ruth's emotional distance played a role in their separation. Ruth's second marriage, to Claire Hodgson, was somewhat more stable, but it too was marked by personal struggles. His constant travel and commitment to baseball left little time for family life. Ruth was frequently away from his wife and stepdaughter, and this created a strain on his relationships. His desire for a perfect family was never fully realized, as his personal demons often took precedence over his responsibilities at home. Despite his fame and fortune, Ruth's personal life seemed to be in turmoil. His inability to settle down, his lack of emotional intimacy, and his inconsistent behavior made it difficult for him to maintain lasting relationships. His struggles with fatherhood were especially difficult. Ruth was often away from his children, and though he loved them, his time away from the family left a mark on his personal life. Ruth's emotional struggles were mirrored by his increasing health problems. His personal life, once a source of excitement and adventure, became a series of challenges he could not fully overcome. His marriages fell apart, and his relationship with his children remained strained. These personal losses affected Ruth more than most realized, and they were a reminder that even a baseball legend like Babe Ruth couldn't escape the difficulties of everyday life. His achievements on the field couldn't fix the heartache he felt off of it. Despite these struggles, Ruth continued to push forward. His larger-than-life personality made it easy to forget that he was a man struggling with deep personal issues. The public loved him, but few truly understood the pain he carried. His personal life remained an ongoing battle, one that Ruth faced with the same intensity that he brought to baseball. But the heartache was undeniable. Ruth had conquered the baseball world, but he couldn't escape his own personal demons. By 1934, Ruth's time with the Yankees was drawing to a close. He had been with the team for over a decade, and his influence on the game had been immeasurable. However, his physical decline, along with his increasing inability to perform at his previous level, signaled that it was time for a change. Ruth's skills were no longer what they had once been, and his time as the Yankees' centerpiece had come to an end. In 1934, Ruth was released by the Yankees. It was a painful departure for both Ruth and the team. Ruth had been the face of the Yankees, the team's greatest player, but he was no longer the force that he had been in his prime. His last season with the Yankees was filled with frustration, as his diminishing skills made it difficult for him to contribute at the same level. The Yankees, who had once built their entire offense around Ruth's power, had grown into a well-rounded team that no longer needed him as their cornerstone. Ruth's departure from the Yankees was symbolic of the end of an era. The team that had dominated the sport for years was now moving on without its greatest player. Ruth's decline mirrored the changing landscape of baseball itself. The sport was evolving, and the new generation of players was more focused on technique and consistency than raw power. Ruth's legacy would live on, but his time as the game's biggest star was over. Even though his playing days were behind him, Ruth's connection to the Yankees remained strong. He continued to support the team in any way he could, but his days as a player had come to an end. It was time for Ruth to step away from the game that had made him a legend. His departure was bittersweet. He had given everything to the sport, and now it was time to let the younger players take over. Ruth's final years with the Yankees were marked by frustration and a sense of loss. The man who had once been unbeatable had become human, vulnerable, and mortal. The transition from being a superstar to being just another former player was difficult, but it was a necessary part of Ruth's journey. Baseball had given him everything, and it was now time for him to step aside. After his time with the Yankees, Ruth didn't immediately walk away from the game he loved. He briefly played for the Boston Braves in 1935, but his body had grown too tired for the game he once ruled. Despite his decline, Ruth was still a beloved figure, and fans flocked to the ballpark to see him one last time. His final season was a reminder of his greatness, but it was also a somber acknowledgement of the passage of time. Ruth's retirement wasn't the grand, triumphant exit that many had expected. Instead, it was filled with mixed emotions: regret, reflection, and the weight of knowing that his playing days were behind him. After leaving the Braves, Ruth found himself disconnected from the game. His health continued to worsen, and he struggled with personal demons. Still, he was involved in public events supporting the country during World War II, making appearances to rally American morale and show his support for the troops. Despite his fading health, Ruth's name was still revered by the public. His legacy as the greatest baseball player of his era was intact, and he continued to be a source of inspiration for fans and players alike. However, his struggles with health and his inability to find peace in his personal life cast a shadow over his final years. Ruth had given everything to the sport, but in the end, it was his own personal struggles that defined his final chapter. In 1948, Ruth's battle with cancer ended his life at the age of 53. His passing left a hole in the world of baseball, but his legacy continued. Ruth had been a larger-than-life figure, and even in death, he remained an enduring symbol of the game he had revolutionized. Babe Ruth's retirement from playing professional baseball marked the end of an era in the sport's history. After his brief time with the Boston Braves in 1935, Ruth officially stepped away from the game he had revolutionized. At 40 years old, Ruth was no longer the explosive powerhouse he once was. The years of grinding on the field, combined with his party-loving lifestyle and poor health, had taken their toll. It was a sad reality for Ruth, whose presence on the field had always been synonymous with excitement and power. Ruth's final season with the Braves was brief. He had struggled throughout the year with injuries and physical decline, which left him unable to keep up with the fast-paced demands of Major League Baseball. Ruth was no longer the same player who had once hit 60 home runs in a season. His swing was slower and his body had changed. The man who had once been the heart of the New York Yankees was now sidelined. He was no longer the centerpiece of a team, and the game had changed in his absence. Though Ruth's departure from the field came quietly, it was significant. The man who had defined baseball in the 1920s was no longer active, and his retirement left a void. The Yankees, once built around Ruth's towering home runs, would now have to forge their identity without him. Baseball, which had flourished thanks to Ruth's dramatic style of play, was evolving. The live ball era was in full swing, but the game would never be the same without the Sultan of Swat. Despite his departure from the game, Ruth's influence was still felt by millions. The Yankees, in particular, had built a dynasty around Ruth's legacy. The fans, too, continued to see him as the embodiment of everything great about the game. But for Ruth, the transition to retirement wasn't easy. His identity had always been tied to baseball, and stepping away from it was a jarring experience. Still, Ruth found ways to stay connected to the sport and remain a beloved figure for years to come. Ruth's retirement, although quiet on the surface, marked the end of one of baseball's most iconic careers. He was no longer the towering figure who changed the game with every swing of the bat, but his impact on baseball and the world was undeniable. Ruth had helped shape baseball into America's pastime, and his influence would continue to echo long after he had left the field. Even in retirement, Ruth was still very much a part of the game's heart. As Ruth stepped away from baseball, he found a new way to contribute to the country that had made him a star. During World War II, Ruth's public appearances became a source of inspiration for a nation at war. Though his physical health had begun to decline, his spirit remained unbroken. Ruth threw himself into supporting the American war effort in any way he could, using his fame to rally the public and boost morale for both the soldiers fighting overseas and the people back home. Ruth's public appearances were more than just about his presence. He used his fame to encourage young men to enlist in the army and participated in various events designed to raise funds for the war effort. Ruth's charisma was unmatched, and his ability to inspire others was still as strong as ever. Even as the man who had once been the Sultan of Swat was physically deteriorating, he continued to give everything he had to the people who had supported him for so many years. One of Ruth's most iconic moments came in 1942, when he made a trip to visit military bases across the country, making appearances and spending time with soldiers. His visits became a symbol of hope for the troops who were fighting on the front lines. Ruth was more than just a sports hero. He was a symbol of American pride, strength, and perseverance. His commitment to the war effort was an extension of his commitment to his country and his fans. Despite his declining health, Ruth never slowed down in his efforts to support the war. His presence at rallies and his active participation in fundraising events raised millions of dollars for the war effort. He used his celebrity status to draw attention to the cause, and his face became synonymous with the national effort to defeat tyranny abroad. Ruth may have left the field, but he never stopped serving the country that had made him a hero. By the time the war ended in 1945, Ruth had made countless appearances in support of the troops. His contributions to the war effort were a testament to his character. Ruth had always been more than just a baseball player. He had always been a person who wanted to make a difference. During the war, that drive became more evident than ever. The fans who had cheered for him in the stadiums now cheered for him as he worked to uplift the spirits of a nation in crisis. In 1936, Ruth received one of the greatest honors of his life when he was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame as one of its inaugural members. Ruth, along with Ty Cobb, Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, and Honus Wagner, was one of the 5 players selected that year. It was a recognition of his extraordinary impact on the game of baseball, and it cemented his place as one of the sport's all-time greats. Ruth had helped elevate baseball from a regional pastime to the national sport of America, and his inclusion in the Hall of Fame was the ultimate acknowledgement of that achievement. For Ruth, the Hall of Fame induction was a moment of pride. It wasn't just about recognition, it was a reminder of how far he had come. From his troubled childhood in Baltimore to his record-breaking seasons with the Yankees, Ruth's journey had been nothing short of remarkable. The Hall of Fame was not just a building where memorabilia was stored. It was a reflection of Ruth's legacy, a place where future generations could learn about the man who had changed the game forever. The Hall of Fame also marked the final recognition of Ruth's baseball career. He had been a part of the game for over 2 decades, and his contributions were far-reaching. Ruth wasn't just a baseball player, he was a cultural figure whose impact transcended the sport itself. His style of play, his charisma, and his ability to connect with fans made him a national hero, and the Hall of Fame induction was a fitting tribute to his achievements. Though Ruth had retired from the game, his legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of fans. Every time a new player broke one of his records or hit a towering home run, it was a reminder of the impact Ruth had made on the game. The Hall of Fame was not just a monument to Ruth's accomplishments. It was a symbol of his enduring influence on the sport he had loved and changed. Ruth's induction into the Hall of Fame solidified his place in history. He had become a symbol of everything that was great about baseball: the power, the excitement, the larger-than-life figures that captured the imagination of the public. His induction was the ultimate recognition of a career that had changed the sport forever. The years following Ruth's retirement were marked by both personal struggles and moments of reflection. As the 1940s progressed, Ruth's health began to fail. His once vibrant figure had begun to deteriorate under the weight of years of poor health, excessive eating, and drinking. Ruth had always been larger than life, but his body was showing the toll of his lifestyle. He had once been a powerful force on the field, but now he was forced to confront his own mortality. In 1946, Ruth was diagnosed with nasopharyngeal cancer. The news was a devastating blow to Ruth, who had spent his life defying the odds. He had been a fighter both on and off the field, But now he was facing a challenge that he couldn't overcome. Ruth's diagnosis was a reminder that even the greatest athletes in history are not immune to the realities of life. The man who had dominated baseball with his bat was now fighting a battle that would ultimately take his life. Despite his illness, Ruth remained active, attending public events and supporting causes close to his heart. He was determined to live his remaining days to the fullest, and he used his influence to continue inspiring others. But as the cancer took its toll, Ruth's health began to deteriorate quickly. His final days were spent in and out of the hospital, and he rarely made public appearances. His family and friends stood by him as he faced his final battle with the same courage that had defined his life. On August 16, 1948, Babe Ruth passed away at the age of 53. His death sent shockwaves through the country. Ruth had been one of the most famous and beloved figures in American sports, and his passing marked the end of an era in both baseball and American culture. Fans who had grown up watching him hit home runs and change the game were left to mourn the loss of the man who had defined an entire generation of baseball fans. Though Ruth's life was cut short, his impact on the world was immeasurable. His legacy lived on in the game of baseball and in the hearts of those who had watched him play. Ruth had been more than just a baseball player. He had been a cultural icon, a symbol of strength, perseverance, and the American spirit. Babe Ruth's influence on baseball extended far beyond his time on the field. Ruth had transformed the game into something bigger than just a sport. His larger-than-life personality and his love for hitting home runs captivated audiences in ways that hadn't been seen before. Ruth wasn't just a great player, he was an entertainer, a man who brought excitement and passion to every game he played. Ruth's cultural significance went beyond baseball. He became a symbol of American resilience, a larger-than-life figure who represented everything that was great about America. His ability to rise from humble beginnings to become a global superstar resonated with millions of fans. Babe Ruth wasn't just a baseball hero, he was a symbol of the American dream. His story inspired countless individuals to chase their dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. Even today, Ruth's legacy lives on. His name is synonymous with greatness, and his influence on the game of baseball can still be felt. The game has changed over the years, but Ruth's contributions remain a cornerstone of the sport. Every time a player steps up to the plate and hits a home run, they are part of the legacy Ruth left behind. His legacy isn't just about the records. It's about the way he changed the game and how he became a national treasure.